Welcome to A Slice of Literature, brought to you by the Alyosha Society, where we are pursuing truth and beauty and goodness through great literature. If you've had a chance to check out any of my Slice of Literature videos, you know that what I usually do is I take a single scene from a great work of literature, something that's so remarkable that it could probably stand on its own. I do provide context, but that scene could potentially stand all by itself. In this Slice of Literature video, I want to give some general comments on the 19th century Russian author Fyodor Dostoevsky, and I want to show you how to read Dostoevsky like a boss. Now listen, do not, no, do not turn me off. Listen, I know some folks are a bit intimidated by authors like Dostoevsky. I hid from him. I ran from him. Whatever books I may have accidentally gotten a hold of, I put them on the back of my shelf for years. And I was pretty terrified. But then I learned a few things, just a few simple things I'm going to share with you in this video. And now he is way, way at the top, fighting for, that number one spot for my favorite authors. So hang with me. Here's my philosophy for years and years as a teacher has been understanding more enjoyment. You understand what you're reading a lot better, then you will enjoy it and you'll get a lot out of it. So let's, I've got some visuals to share with you. Of course I have visuals. Come on. And voila. Okay. Now, there you go. 5 things to know in order to read Dostoevsky like a boss. See, I looked at that. I saw that picture of him. It's on like every book. And if you Google Dostoevsky, he's got that, that brooding, I'm extremely intelligent and you'll never understand anything I write look on his face. No, guys. No. No, I read a biography that his second wife wrote that was published around 1910. He was just a big teddy bear, man. He laughed, he played with his children. Okay, it's just don't go by that picture. Number one, the first thing you need to know is that Russia was a Christian nation. Now, hear me out for a second. I know what you're probably thinking. What? Of all the nations in the world, that would be one of the last nations I would think. Well, yeah, that's post 1917. That's after the Bolshevik Revolution. You have the Soviet Union, you have this communist state, all this death and destruction, all these horrible things going on under Stalin and others. But guys, before that, from the time that Vladimir embraced the Christian faith in AD 987, Russia was a Christian nation. Doesn't mean every single individual in the country. You know what I mean by that. But they were essentially a Christian nation. Now, why is that important? Just hang on. These 5 points kind of, follow one another and all make sense after you see them all. Now, starting with the time of Peter the Great, and then Catherine the Great. This is a couple of, a few hundred years before Dostoevsky comes along in the 19th century. They had leaders, and Peter the Great and Catherine the Great are 2 very good examples, who thought to themselves, Russia needs to become more like Europe. We need to advance more. And by the way, they've had this terrific thing going on over there called the Enlightenment, where they're kind of exalting reason and logic and science and so forth, sort of leaving behind some of those old, outdated biblical fairy tale views. And what began to happen during those decades and centuries is a growing tension between what I call the Slavs and the Dubs. The Slavs, that's just a short word for Slavophile. The Slavophiles were the individuals who said, no, we don't want to become more like Europe. Europe is kind of left behind their Christian faith. Over here in Russia, we are we are Orthodox, capital O. And we're going to hang on to tradition, the authority of the Bible, the authority of the church. You might call them the more conservative group. Well, the Dubs, I just call them Dubs because they're W's, they're Westernizers. These were the individuals coming along who said, no, we need to be more progressive. We need to be more along the lines of the Enlightenment, reason, science, logic. Yeah, it's probably time that we leave behind, all of these fairy tales. People don't really walk on water and people don't raise other people from the dead. And so the Westernizers would be, I guess in modern terms, you might even look at them more like conservative versus liberal, right versus left. If I can just kind of use modern day term, they wouldn't have used terms like that. But that's kind of a good way to look at it. Okay, so this tension is building. Again, Peter the Great, Catherine the Great, and then when Dostoevsky is born in 1821, this tension has been building, friends, for hundreds of years. And Dostoevsky is born into this environment. Now, within that context, Dostoevsky himself was very split. He was very divided because he grew up in a Christian home, a home that you might call more Slavophilic, more conservative. His parents read the Bible to him. They worshiped together. And they were a very traditional Russian Orthodox family. Now, what happens to Dostoevsky? Well, in the 1840s, so at this point, Dostoevsky would be in his, let's say, mid-20s. He does what a lot of folks in their mid-20s do, who may have been raised in a Christian home. He kind of starts to drift. He's like, yeah, I don't know if I'm really going to embrace this whole Christian worldview or not. And he gets involved in a very radical anti-czarist group called the Petrashevsky Circle. And he wasn't leading it or anything like that, but he was going to the meetings, and he was split. He was kind of divided. He was wrestling with, am I going to be more of a Slav or a Dub? Well, this is not good. Nicholas the First in 1849 breaks up this group, arrests all the members. They're put on trial. Dostoevsky was actually sentenced to death by firing squad. The execution was called off at the last second, and he was sent to a Siberian labor camp in Omsk, Siberia. So for 4 years, he wore leg chains and he did hard time in the Siberian labor camp. On his way there, one of the wives of the Decembrists, that was a revolt that took place in the 1820s. You'll have to look that one up. I don't have time to explain it here. But their ministry, these wives, they would hand copies of the Gospels, the Bible, to men who were going off to Siberia. It was the only book that Dostoevsky was allowed to possess for those 4 years. And by the way, on top of the 4 years, he ended up getting 6 years mandatory military service after that. So he was really in exile, away from his home and doing the time for his crime for 10 years. So what happens is this copy of the Gospels and John, the Gospel of John, just resonated with him tremendously. So he then sort of turned back to the faith of his childhood, the faith that his parents brought him up in. And when he came out of Siberia, friends, and he comes back west, okay, he comes back to Moscow, Petersburg, he is now fighting with a vengeance as a very powerful voice in favor of the Slavophile movement. Friends, forget Europe. They've gone, they've kind of gone the way of reason. Russia needs to remain Orthodox, Christian, traditional, conservative. So here's the key. Number 5 brings it all together. Friends, at his post, and I'm going to go through some examples, his post-Siberian novels, in all of them, he is fighting a culture war. And if you don't know that, then you can't read Dostoevsky like a boss. Okay, you might get a little bit out of him, but if you don't know this very specific context and the reason he's writing that has a background really of knowing what Russia had been through for hundreds of years, you're not going to be able to read Dostoevsky like a boss. So there you have it. Russia was a Christian nation. We had this Slavophile versus Westernizer, conservative versus liberal / progressive tension. Dostoevsky himself experienced that tension, having been raised in a Christian home, but then joining an anti-czarist group. He then returned, he bounces back, he ping-pongs himself, he comes back to his faith. But when he comes back to his faith, guys, okay, from 1859 on, he is locked in. And speaking of which, let's go over some of those examples here. Just a second to bring those up. Okay, let's look at some examples. Let's start with, actually, I think I have these in chronological order of publication. Notes from Underground, very popular little novella, barely 100 pages, but a very powerful work. What's he doing here? Well, what he's doing in this story is he's making a parody of this novel. Now, Chernyshevsky, who wrote What Is to Be Done, was about as far left, and again, those are terms we use. They wouldn't have used these terms. I just know they're helpful for us today. He was about as far on the radical left, anti-czarist, anti-Christian side of things as you can get. He was advocating for socialism, sort of a reimagination of the whole idea of marriage and male and female relationships and roles of men and women and so forth. He is laying out the uber liberal agenda here. And Dostoevsky is making, this was published the year after Chernyshevsky's novel came out. So if you don't know that he is fighting this culture war, this doesn't make any sense. But here's the thing. In Chernyshevsky's novel, Chernyshevsky is writing in response to another novel that was written before that by Ivan Turgenev called Fathers and Sons. So it's a little bit, this ping pong, battle of the culture wars is a little bit like what you might see in Twitter wars today, except they're much longer, way more substantive, way more intellectual and thoughtful, but they're still kind of sort of the same. These authors are putting forth their 2 cents worth and advocating for either the Slavophiles or the Westernizers in this culture war that's going on in the 19th century in Russia. So Turgenev, he gets his tweet out, then Chernyshevsky gets his tweet out, and then, the references to Chernyshevsky in Notes from Underground are all over the place. But if you know what they are and you know that ahead of time, I have heard many a misinterpretation of this book because someone reading it or teaching it doesn't even understand that it's a parody of Chernyshevsky's novel. Next, Crime and Punishment. Friends, Crime and Punishment's a little bit autobiographical. The protagonist, Raskolnikov, his name itself, Raskolnik, in Russian means split, divided, just like Dostoevsky was. It's about a 19-year-old kid, 20, whatever he was, university student. He was, yep, you guessed it, raised in a Christian home, but now he's kind of hearing all these cool, progressive ideas at the university, and he thinks all the stuff he was raised on is bunk. So he's going to try to actually live it out and see if it works. And what Dostoevsky is demonstrating in Crime and Punishment is, okay, fine. Let's just get in that worldview car. Let's put it in gear. Let's drive it and let's just see where it ends up. Let's see if it works. Does it make sense with the way things are? That's what he's doing in Crime and Punishment. And you probably noticed that I'm not giving a whole lot of plot here. No, I don't want to, just you read the story. I don't want to spoil any plots. The next one I want to mention is The Idiot. Oh, really? Are you serious? Is that someone that just said, what, is that a biography of you, Bruce? Oh, wow. Hilarious. Like I've never heard that joke before. Okay, so what's he doing in The Idiot? Well, whereas the other two novels are sort of a response to a negative, in The Idiot, Dostoevsky said with the protagonist, Prince Mishkin, that he's trying to create the perfect man, the ideal man. So, you know, if the man of the 40s, and so they had all these phrases in the mid-19th century Russia, you know, the woman of the 40s or the man of action, you know, all these little hipster phrases. Dostoevsky, rather than just constantly saying, no, that's not right, he wants to, again, this is just as much a part of the tension of the culture wars as anything. Two more. Then he writes Demons, or The Possessed. Translation of the title varies. So what he's doing in this one is it's about a group of, you guessed it, socialist radical revolutionaries who are attempting to overthrow their government. What Dostoevsky is demonstrating in this novel is, what are the presuppositions of this worldview? What does it look like? How does it flesh out? And where does it land? Where does it end up? Again, Slavophiles, Westernizers, culture wars going on in Russia. And then I know if you're watching a video like this, you've probably read the brothers Karamazov. This is his magnum opus, guys. This is not a home run. This is a grand slam. Okay, this is his last work. He died 4 months after this book was finally published. And it's about a lot of things. It's about tackling the biggest objections to the Christian faith, to being a Slavophile, to embracing biblical truth in the church. It's all about attacking the most potent arguments against that view. And again, this book goes a lot of places, but one thing in particular, a lot of the tension and the conversations are between the brothers, obviously, Alyosha. This is obviously where I get the name for my organization, the Alyosha Society. Alyosha is the Christian individual, so he's more the Slavophile. And Ivan represents unbelief of some kind, atheism, or I just can't accept God the way you explain him to me. And in their conversations, what you're seeing is this decades-long, centuries-long battle between Slavophiles and Westernizers, conservative, liberal, traditional, Bible-believing, Orthodox Christians versus European, specifically maybe French and German Enlightenment thinking. And the conversations are just remarkable in this novel. So, recap. How to read Dostoevsky like a boss. You're not going to read him like a boss if you don't understand that Russia, starting in AD 987, began as a Christian nation, but then with Peter the Great, Catherine the Great, and depending on who the ruler was, kind of bounced back and forth with this rising tension between Slavophiles and Westernizers. Dostoevsky himself experienced that same conflict, raised in a Christian home, became a member of the Petrushevsky Circle, ended up going to Siberia, reads the Gospel of John, comes back to his faith there, and then hits the road running from 1859 until 1881 when he died, fiercely, intelligently, eloquently, passionately fighting the culture war that was going on in Russia at the time. There you have it. how to read Dostoevsky like a boss. Did I miss anything? Email me. No, come on. I'm serious. Don't be timid. Email me. Bruce@AlyoshaSociety.com.